Today's after chapter discussion will be about 8.69 and 8.70, and the next after chapter discussion will be on Wednesday, and it'll cover all the chapters from Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday if it's released at that time. And then the final after chapter discussion for this week's uh, chapter a day madness will be next Sunday, and it'll cover all the chapters between Wednesday and the Sunday. For today's, we're going to try and split it up. So we're going to talk about 8.69 first, and we'll go through the discussion questions for 8.69, and then once that's done, we'll move on to 8.70. Or 8.70. So let's just start with 8.69 on any general thoughts or general impressions anyone has that they want to share. Uh, how much you like the chapter, what you think about it overall, and anything like that. And I'll start by saying that it was a very fast-paced chapter. It was uh, quite a bit different from what we've gotten throughout this volume, in that it was a fast-paced, very focused chapter on one point of view, and I think it was really nice to see that kind of chapter after so long without it, because uh, just having something like that is really a breath of fresh air. And the chapter itself was actually quite unique in how we approached it, because we saw how Tyrion was thinking and how he was dealing with his inner emotions more than anything, rather than dealing with the war aspect, which was, kind of just an afterthought in his mind. It was just something he was doing while he was thinking about what he wanted from his relationship with Ryoka. So does anyone else have any thoughts, or should we move on to the questions? All right, I don't see anyone typing in the reaction and comments channel, so I'm just going to assume that no one else has anything they want from that. So let's just move on into the questions right away. Um, first question. First question we have here is about how this was the most, well, this is my personal opinion, by the way. This is a question I'm asking, but this was basically one of the most romantic chapters uh, we've seen, basically, from from The Wandering Inn, and I'm wondering if you all thought that aspect was done well. And by that I mean the chapter was very much focused on how Tyrion was feeling about Ryoka, and um, how he wanted to approach his relationship with her, and how, in many ways, he's been feeling very lonely and feeling that he doesn't really have anything to bring to the table for this kind of relationship. So I'm wondering if you guys feel that this was very well done, or if it could have been improved. And for me, I thought it was a really good in how it depicted Tyrion and how he sees himself and sees his relationships. And it shows his struggle with being someone he doesn't really understand other relationships. He just knows that he kind of doesn't have much to bring outside of just being good with the lance. Which, yes, there's been a million jokes about that particular phrasing and how everyone thinks of it. But I think he's being very sincere and it's touching. So, uh, Mr. Europe, you wanted to talk.
Yeah, I really like this chapter and this aspect of it especially, just a very introspective and like chapter from Tyrion's perspective, that he's just analyzing what he actually feels and um, how how a relationship would go, and actually just having these kinds of feelings analyzed in the stories really kind of refreshing, actually. Uh, yeah, that's personally, I wish there was more like this, not just the romantic stuff, but also the just introspective kind of character pieces. Sometimes I really like that we got concentrated here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that this kind of introspective character development isn't something we see very much, but it was honestly really well done. It's just kind of hard to put it in, at least in this volume, because we've been so plot heavy so far, and we've tried to move through so many different plots so quickly. And so it hasn't given as much time for that kind of introspective look into how characters are behaving right now.
I was also gonna say that it's personally, I'm very surprised that out of Tyrion and Ryoka, Tyrion was the one who got the introspective section at least first, since Ryoka is like the most not necessarily analyzing in that perspective, but the most introspective character in the series, more or less.
Yeah. And I think part of that, part of the reason why we got his before we got, her look is simply because Tyrion is a less explored character. So this kind of introspective look gives us a lot of insight where we didn't have it as much before. Like we had it from an exterior perspective, and we could see his actions, but we couldn't really see what he was thinking. And this kind of gives us that. Um, Menabir says there have been many overt romantic interactions between couples up to this point, but nothing in this introspective manner. It was done well. And of course, Tyrion started having lewd thoughts in chapter 8.69. Yes, exactly. I'm going to blame the number for how many people have looted it up in this chapter, have looted like every single quote from the chapter about his lance and all that. I'm gonna blame the number, not anything else. Kylara, you wanted to speak.
Yes, hi. I thought it was interesting how he had some good thoughts, I'll just tell her how I feel, things like that, and then promptly discards them as being absolutely too much and over the top. But it was also an interesting look into his mindset that he has things to offer that are quality, like positive qualities in a relationship, but he doesn't even think about them because he's just not used to it. Like Tyrion and Ryoka are both highly loyal people, I think. And he's demonstrated that with like his sons, and she does it all the time, even though it scares her a lot. She does tend to run away. But his brain just doesn't go to any of those things. He's like anything that's related to feelings, it still isn't quite clicking for him. He's only looking at like external qualities like things and artifacts and um, abilities in war. So he's getting there, but he's not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think that's part of his. I don't even know. I don't want to like psychoanalyze him or anything like that because I feel that that's kind of something you shouldn't do too much. But it feels a lot like he struggles with interconnecting with other people, and this kind of feeling that he doesn't have anything material to bring to the relationship means that he doesn't have anything to give. He doesn't really understand how other people's emotions work in a relationship, it seems. And we see that a lot in how he's trying to figure things out in his own mind. And he doesn't know that, that quote we had in the chapter. Let me try and find it real fast. The quote that he said, um, the quote where he's like, "I feel better around you. I rather like you. You do not have much in the way of sword fighting sense. You not ride well, and you and I have our differences. But I like you because you run like I ride. You flew, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in an age. You make my son smile and me." And then
Yeah,
he immediately says, "Of course, he was sure that fell under things never to be said." It's like that's exactly what he should say, and he just doesn't understand that.
yeah, and I think maybe part of the problem is just the people he's around all the time, like the nobility and arranged marriages and stuff like that. He doesn't quite get it because obviously that's not gonna. Well, it might work in this situation if Ryoka needs an army for some reason, but most of the time that's not gonna work with me.
Yeah, exactly. Comrade Burv says, introspection is something that we usually only see with Ryoka POVs. Rhythm and Bruise, you wanted to speak now? Rhythm? Descanter?
Aha! I need the other mute button as well. There we go. So I thought the introspection was particularly well done with this kind of juxtaposition, almost like it was this voiceover of him kind of thinking while he's going around carving this swath of destruction through Elendamus's forces in Kalanfur. So I just really enjoyed how it kind of moved him along towards that final fight while he was doing that. I was thinking about the point about this is what you should say, that this is really too over the top with his quote, was extra funny when put in contrast with he thinks it's a perfectly fine thing to do at this stage to guarantee that he's not going to demand more than one child out of it. When he's saying that that's a perfectly fine thing to say, but talking about how she flies and so forth is completely beyond the pale and something he should never say. And the last thing I keep on thinking when I was going through this and what people are talking is Tyrion and Azkarash are really very similar characters in this story.
How so?
So they're both these people who kind of relatively early on do the most horrible things. Like Azkarash has the history of trying to destroy all life, and Tyrion's big moment in Volume 5 of driving all the goblins to destroy Liskor. And so they're these kind of larger than life war criminals, at least in the past now. But they haven't done anything objectionable in a while. And so that's kind of faded a little bit to varying to greater or lesser degrees in the minds of, I think, both the characters and the readers. And so it's but neither of them have disavowed it. So it's kind of there and kind of wondering, is that still a thing they're getting back to or not?
Yeah, especially because we've been given a lot of look we've been given a lot of look into their better sides for a long time now. And it's kind of it makes you wonder whether or not we'll get back into that, villainous role. Not that there were ever not that Tyrion was ever like a one-to-one villain, but someone like Askarash had a lot of moments where he was trying to exterminate everyone, and right now we've been seeing a lot of him trying to help the characters. It'll be interesting to see if
Right.
it turns back to the whole extermination angle later on when he comes into conflict with our characters more.
Right. And I was also going is that neither Tyrion nor Azkarash neither of them have disavowed their previous actions or that mindset. They both still think that's the right way to be overall, or at least they say they do.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's just who they are basically at this point.
Right. Although I don't know. I'm actually not sure, particularly with his talking about how mostly his attacking the Drakes is kind of this at least from my point of view, misguided loyalty and duty to the idea of revenge for his wife. And so I feel like he could grow out of it, much like I feel like Azkarash could possibly grow out of the I'm going to kill everyone. So I think that there's possibilities in either front. And for Tyrion, I'm especially torn, I think, for Tyrion because I like personally as a reader, until he moves past the genocide, I'm like, I don't know how to feel about this. He's getting entangled and doing good things and supporting people. But the destroy the city, he's terrible.
Yeah, and that actually leads into our next question, basically, which was, how do you feel about Tyrion now, knowing everything we know right now, versus uh, what he's done in the past? Like, how does everyone uh, how does everyone come to terms with how we see him right now, with how he was depicted in Volume 5, where he tried to go and basically did a Trail of Tears style march for goblins to try and take over Liscor. And while everyone responds to that question, I'm going to finish up the responses to the last question. Ren said, I want to see Tyrion's lance work blush. And yes, I'm sure he's a very good lancer. I'm sure he's jousted quite a few times, and we could all learn a few things from watching him joust. It's good that you want to get into jousting. Not many people nowadays like to see that. Yeah. Menamir says, I think this kind of thing gets people more invested in a ship between the characters. You start rooting for them when you can understand them, and they become more sympathetic. Comrade Burv says, I saw a lot of similarities between Tyrion and a lot of the Antinian POVs we get of experimenting with different thoughts outside of their comfort zones and either dismissing good thoughts and enabling hilariously bad ideas. They both have a comical misunderstanding of social norms. Munch says, Azcrash is a revenant, right? An undead life form that hates the living, as far as I'm aware. Unlike Kelt's rulers who chose it willingly, he didn't. Perhaps a natural revival after his death, or the manner of it? So perhaps his evil side is just vestiges of hate to the living. Menamir says, regarding Tyrion's character arc, having all the villains become sympathetic allies gets kind of old. I don't want this to become like Naruto did. This much is okay, but if the six evil gods become Aaron's buddies, then I'm out. As far as we've seen, I don't think the gods are changing ever. Like, they've had eons of time to become different people after they basically died, and they haven't. I really don't see the gods ever changing, or the six gods at least, ever changing significantly to better themselves in the character's eyes. Jamaro says, in response to Munch's as Crash Revenant comment, Jamaro says, no, he is explicitly not, as he can level. We do not know the specifics of his immortality. And I will say that he could still be a Revenant. It just could be some like advanced form of Revenant we just don't know about right now, which is, something we'll learn about maybe sometime in the future. Who knows? Vesker said, when he found a leveling formula, he felt he might get closer to leveling again, which could be both. Nobody says, Tyrion is cracking on the Drake front. In Volume 4 to 5, Tyrion would have said to his kids without doubt that killing Drakes is the right thing to do. In Volume 8, we saw him being confronted by Ryoka and his kids over and over, and slowly his responses become softer. He wouldn't kill all of Liscor. He starts stuttering. He starts not being sure and deflecting and avoiding Ryoka and his kids' question about his attitude to Drakes. The work is there. Vesker says either either he can level or has hope to restart leveling again in terms of Azcrash. And yeah, I think he can level. That's how I've always read that quote, but I understand that it's not like 100% sure that that's how it should be read. Um, Ren says in response to Metamir's Tyrion character arc comment, I never saw Tyrion as a villain, an antagonist, sure, but not a villain. And now, at the time of like Volume 5, it was very easy to see him as this big villain just because he was going against every single one of our characters, basically. But in a lot of ways, that's just a kind of, it's like you said, it's just antagonism against them. And it wasn't even really because of the characters themselves. It was an overarching goal to uh, win against the Drakes, and he never really had any personal vendetta against our characters, which kind of rules him out as a villain at this point in a lot of ways to me. But it's kind of a wishy-washy thing in my mind on that front. Germaro says, I find Ascrash much easier to not be seen as a villain compared to Tyrion, but maybe it's just because compared to Az, he is rather boring. Ren says in response to Nobody's comment, it makes sense because much of his Drake hate comes from the assassination of his wife. Now he's found someone that can fill the hole in his heart. And yeah, absolutely. Just knowing that basically all of this is because of that uh all this is him trying to get revenge and him like having this introspective and seeing that he's still very lonely. It's kind of like refocusing him at a time at this time, and so he can really choose to be something else if he wanted to. Rhythm and Bruise, you wanted to speak?
Yep. I'm wondering with this kind of talk is what someone needs to be a villain versus an antagonist or other things. And where that is. Because I was thinking of at least to me, it's I think it's someone working around, and so whatever the motivations are, if I as the reader sort of think they're wrong and doing bad things, then they're a villain. Is where I'll put my line in the sand. I'm kind of curious what you thought or what anyone else might have thought about that.
Yeah, and I don't know, like a villain is someone who is, in my mind anyways, a villain is someone who is just kind of evil, basically. They're doing evil things, even if they're have all the right reasons in the world, they're being an evil person and doing horrible things. And it's like Tyrion in a lot of ways does fit that criteria, but at the same time, like any war leader that fights in a war and plans and tries to get things done is a villain to whoever they're fighting. And so when you actually get their perspective and you see why they're trying to do these things and they have their own like motivations and they're not like horrible things and they're not even committing like horrible crimes in their own eyes because goblins, let's be real, no one in N-World treats goblins as people, basically. So using them as weapons of war isn't even really a horrible thing for them to do. And so it just kind of becomes much harder for me to see them as uh straight as a straight villain. Sorry about my dog.
Well, that's fair. I think I was taking a much more different, a somewhat more different approach, at least in my mind of it, of they're a villain if they're a villain. They're doing these things. They're a villain. I do agree with you about that. There are degrees of it, and someone who is a villain is not necessarily a villain in all aspects. Although that makes it sort of harder for me to appreciate those other points I had on the subject.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. It's kind of a wishy-washy definition for me because it depends a lot on how we view the characters rather than how they're also what the actions they're taking also. Metamir says, yeah, Tyrion is no pursuer, a cruelly malicious person who is involved in or devoted to wickedness or crime. Scoundrel. Pandurmine says, Ryoka taking place of Salva emotionally, I feel would reduce Tyrion's character. Really? If you wouldn't mind expanding on that a little bit, I'd like to hear your reasons why that is. Mr. Europe, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, just regarding this villain talk, is just that I think there's a big difference between villain and just like antagonist, so to speak. You can have a good, like someone who's a good person, but is because of their beliefs are uh, like an adversary to the protagonists, and what they're doing might be thought of as wrong, but if you understand, for an example, if the heroes are trying to save the world and are trying to do something, then the another person might try to save the world in a different way that goes counter to what the protagonists are doing. That doesn't make them a villain, even if their version of saving the world is slightly more villainous. Sorry if this is a bit uh, not as coherent, but
No, it's
for an
okay.
example of a like proper villain for me needs to either be someone who's doing the things they do strictly for selfish reasons, like just doing kind of bad things for reasons that really aren't justifiable in any way, or what they're doing is completely unjustifiable in any way. Like, for example, I don't think you can have a slaver whose motivations and backstory makes them like sympathetic, and I don't think you can have like a character like Persua be like do even if she does heroic things, you couldn't really call her a hero either way.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on your viewpoint of villains there. It's just that a villain is more than someone who is, against your protagonist in many ways because uh, people disagree. They have different viewpoints on what is right and wrong, and just because you're up against someone else, that doesn't mean you're a villain to them. It means you're someone antagonistic, but it it's more nuanced than just if you're against me, you're a villain in my eyes. Pangermine says, is Salva just so unfridged, so Tyrion hates Drakes? I hope that no matter what happens there is more depth explored with Tyrion's and Salva's relationship. Um, the whole fridging thing is something I hear a lot about, and I know it's something prevalent in a lot of literature, fantasy series where women are just killed off to have men be angry about it. And I don't really see that in The Wandering Inn as much, simply because uh, it's kind of an expansive story, and ha- having that emotional issue there isn't just because she's a woman, so she's killed off just like that. It it's much more nuanced than wandering in. So I don't really think of it as fridging so much. Jamaro says, I disagree with nobody's view on Tyrion changing. To me, it's all him reacting to external objections to his actions. Tyrion himself hasn't moved an inch internally on the issue. He was even disappointed that Salas, a person that risked the life for his sons and healed them, didn't die while fighting the assassins. Regarding treating goblins as weapons, treating them as monsters is one thing, abusing them and putting them through a few weeks of harsh, forced march can only be described as torture, so it is not, it's bad no matter whether you see goblins as monsters or not. This is kind of a, stupid comparison in my own mind, but, like, we have butchers that like torture animals basically in our everyday lives to try and raise them as livestock. And it's like in a lot of ways that's how people in the in world think of goblins. They're monsters. They don't have any thoughts or feelings beyond horrible things they want to do to other people. So treating them like garbage, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to those kinds of to people in in world at all because they're monsters. And it's kind of like a disconnect in your own mind how you treat someone because of how you view them. And I'm not saying it's a good thing uh, for Tyrion to have done that, but I don't think he would have ever done something like that to anyone he considers not a monster. Rin says, I think the prime example of a villain in TWI is the Naga. Also, a protagonist can be the villain. Yeah, exactly. The Naga is eminently villainous in how he acts in every way. Munch says in reply to Mr. Europe, following on, antagonist is purely based around being or acting in opposition to a person, specifically a main character. Blue/Gary from Pokemon has the same goal as Red/Ash to be champion. Only one can be, thus they are antagonists to each other's story, but neither is a villain on that alone. The problem with the villain is that it is usually based on doing evil acts or having evil motivations, but evil is more of an abstract concept based on morality, which varies from perspectives, especially in a fantasy story. Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Kylara, you wanted to speak. Kylara? You there?
Sorry. I think the Tyrion situation is sort of complicated. I'd probably class him more like an antagonist. What he did is defensible from his point of view, but obviously, like, we have a different point of view as readers because of how Aaron views the world primarily. And I do think that this will be interesting in upcoming chapters when he meets Rabbit Eater and so on. And because even though people have told him, he hasn't really had conversations with goblins and things like that that might actually change his view. And even if it did, I don't think he will feel bad about what he did specifically because of which goblins he was targeting. Like going after the Goblin Lord, the whole North wanted to do that, and so did the south of Israel, right? And then he decides, well, we'll do the mountain goblins as well because they've been razing towns to the ground. And then obviously goblins that we as readers like kind of got caught up in that. Um, and then obviously the more indefensible thing is probably that he uses them to attack a city. But I personally think the real reason Magnolia stepped in and stopped that was because not so much that she cared if he did it, but that if the Drakes don't hold the pass, then there's no reason for them to agree to her sort of peace plot, for lack of a better phrase, because then you don't need then the trade network that she wants to set up is sort of in the human hands, and she wanted it in the Drake's hands as leverage. I think it's complicated, but I don't think he's straight villainous because he hasn't done stuff that, from his point of view, like, it just saved the lives of his people. It's not villainous in the way that I would think of it, which probably for me is classed as like over the top ridiculousness. Unexplainable evil, maybe.
Yeah, that's a lot of my view on it as well. It's just that he his moral compass isn't the same as ours is in regards to goblins. Like he views them purely as something that is there killing humans, killing humans and making human lives dangerous simply by their existence. And that's how monsters are in uh, their whole culture. So him treating them like he did, it makes sense, even if we, the reader, can understand that it's absolutely wrong in a lot of ways, but it's just not in his moral compass, where it's just not there because of how he's grown up, how human society in Israel views goblins, and how he was part of the Goblin King, getting rid of the Goblin King just 20, what was it, 10 years ago. So yeah, it's not there for him to see how wrong that was. Munch, in reply to Kylara, says, I believe if Tyrion had taken Lisgore, he would have used it as a base to launch further wars, making peace impossible. Leaving it to the Drakes keeps the status quo. Rhythm Brews, you wanted to speak?
So I think that on those kind of two fronts, the goblins, I can see a lot of things in the goblins. To me, the question is what he does with it when that view gets challenged, sort of like what happened to Relk. So Relk is further along that path where he was pretty much in the Tyrion camp as far as goblins were at the start of volume 1, and then kind of has gradually moved out from that as timing goes on. And Tyrion really hasn't had that personal challenge to the worldview that Relk got, and so he hasn't really had the chance to grow out of it in the same way. But I think that that's coming as he's going to the siege of Rabbit Eater if he ever finds out that Rabbit Eater's there and is going to be interacting with Ryoka more and whatnot. So I think he has a chance there. So it's kind of not yet written, I think, where his view on that is. And at least to me, his attack on Lisker is the fact that he's attacking Lisker. He's still kind of crazy over the killing his wife thing, but he should know better, at least to me, there by this point. And so I'm less giving him a he's culturally brought up this way, and so he hasn't had a chance to break out of it yet.
All right. Well, I think we are going to move on from this question now, since it has taken up quite a lot of time, but it is basically the meat of the chapter, is talking about Tyrion, how he views the world. So I'm just going to wrap up with one more question, and then we're going to move on to 8.70. So last question, what do you guys think Rysveri's plans are regarding Samuel? Like, why won't he give Samuel up? It makes sense basically why he won't give up Ryoka, because she has those obols, she has the connection to the Fairy King and the fairies and the Fey realm and all that. But why is it that he won't give up Samuel as well? He's basically only there as a prisoner, and his involvement as a prisoner uh, directly leads to Tyrion being involved in this war. So why won't he give him up? Munch says giving him up would admit defeat, weakness, inferiority. Uh, yeah, honestly, that that could be one of the big reasons why Rysveri does anything, is because he's way too arrogant and way too proud to admit that he made a mistake. And so giving up this kind of bargaining chip isn't something he's willing to do. It's kind of even seen in how the peace offers to Tyrion were like the peace offers, they were all insultingly bad. Even the third one or whatever was just insultingly bad. I can understand giving bad offers at the beginning when you thought maybe you had more of a chance, but it's baffling in many ways why they don't just say, "Hey, here's Samuel, just take him." And they could like say that Ryoka is more of a prisoner than Samuel, and so you can't have her, but just give up Samuel. Why not? Kylara, you wanted to speak.
I think that that's a lot of it. It's sort of similar to, yes, he wanted to kidnap Ryoka and find out how she got into the vault, but even after he knew, like, he still had the scroll. He was just like, I'm keeping you around because. But the bigger part, I think, is that he doesn't care a whole lot that, Tyrion is putting pressure on the war and stuff because he still views it as inevitable. They're going to win. It doesn't matter if some order of the Hydra get decimated. He specifically doesn't care. Other people in Alien Dominus definitely do, but that's okay. He doesn't. It's not worth him going back on something, losing face, that kind of thing, in order to save a couple of battalions. I think from his point of view. And the other situation is that I think he wants the ship, the Pride of the Welfar, because he's mentioned that before, and Tyrion has explicitly said, like, if he gets his son back and Ryoka, that he's going to leave. And then that ship will be back in Israel, and the Welfar don't really bring it out very often, from what I understand. They sort of mostly keep it close to home. So he'll lose his chance at that. Now that he's decided that he wants it, he doesn't let things go. He's kind of very dragon-like in that way. So he's not going to let Tyrion leave because a couple battalions is a small sacrifice to make for a chance at that ship.
I hadn't considered that at all, and that's a very good point. It's just it's something. It's like the Eternal Throne, basically. He wants these kind of old, powerful weapons in his arsenal, and so keeping the Pride of the Welfare around while he tries to maneuver it in such a way that he can capture it is a pretty good reason to keep Tyrion in this war. It really allows him um, to get something that he wants desperately. And you're right, he doesn't care about all these other people. They're just pawns in his game. So he doesn't care if he loses a few soldiers here and there as long as he has the chance to get that ship. Menomir says, it does seem like he's avoiding admitting to a mistake. I feel like if he cannot ever admit to a mistake, things won't go well for his nation. So maybe this is a big test for it and for him. And yeah, maybe this could be the very first big, large-scale war that Alien Domus is losing after a certain point. Like, this could be the biggest threat to them they've ever faced in their very short, I say very short, but 200-year history. And so it'll be interesting if they manage to come out of this intact after Risveri has shown how kind of arrogant he is. Mr. Europe says, I feel like the main reason the peace offers don't mention Ryoka and Samuel is because Risveri is not telling anyone what his plans are, so the diplomats can't even begin to offer anything regarding it. And yeah, that just goes to um, him being very arrogant about how he sees things and just wanting to do things by himself and do it and not see his subordinates as like trying to actually help him in dealing with the situation. He just doesn't care what they think. Rhythm and Bruce, you want to speak?
Yeah. So I was thinking I agree on both fronts on the Samuel thing and for Ryoka for most of it. The thing that I found really kind of weird is that during the period I assume it felt like there was this period of time when Ryoka was like actually a free agent, which is after she paid off the obols to Risveri and before Eldiven showed up, when Risveri had essentially renounced claim over her. Although I don't know how much of that kind of filtered down, but she could have walked out at that point, and I believe she could have walked out at that point and just stuck around because there were still things she wanted to get out of it. And so I find it's a little odd that there wasn't a period of time where someone essentially said, okay, don't bother asking after Ryoka again, unless that was either between the negotiating sessions, so it happened fast enough that there was never a negotiating there, or Elendamus just felt it was too weird to start talking about Ryoka and still not talk about Samuel or something. But that stretch of time felt kind of odd when juxtaposed with the negotiations of between Tyrion and Elendamus.
I guess my response to that would just be, I don't think the diplomats were informed, basically, of that kind of her freedom, kind of in that regard.
So you think the diplomats still thought she was a unwilling guest of the state during that period
Yes.
of time?
Is
And just no one ever told them, so they didn't know. So essentially, the news didn't catch up to them in time between negotiations for it to happen.
yes.
Because I feel like eventually they would have known if Eldovin hadn't shown up and thrown it all into chaos again.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're dealing with Duke Risveri, who is known as a very touchy duke in the kingdom. So I think they would want to be absolutely sure of his intentions before going to someone, a foreign power, basically, with their intent to negotiate for her release. So I don't think they got that in that little time frame.
That does make some sense. Though I am a little surprised. I'm kind of surprised Roka didn't get a message out or something during that period of time. I can see various reasons why it wouldn't. It just feels weird to me, that stretch where she's actually free but nobody knows it because neither she nor anyone else actually tells anyone outside like the immediate guards and Risveri and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Munch says, I would propose that part of Ryoka hanging around might be related to Riss not wanting her out of sight until the scroll situation is dealt with. And yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons why Ryoka is being stuck there. Like, there's 10 different reasons alone that you can think of why Ryoka needs to stick around in Risveri's mind. But it's just the Samuel part that is really sticking there because, like, why wouldn't they release him? But yeah. So that will be it for talking about 8.69. We're going to move on to 8.70 here. I'm going to go get a water real fast, and while I'm gone, just think about or start typing out any responses to this that you guys want. But basically, what are your guys' general thoughts about 8.7? How'd you feel about it? What you like, what you dislike, anything like that? Go ahead and type it out in reactions and comments. I'll be back in just a minute. If anyone wants to talk during this break, go ahead.
So regarding Tyrion's daydreams,
Because it's gone. What should Tyrion get for a new mount?
perhaps a unicorn that shares his sensibilities regarding Ryoka.
What did I just hear?
What?
What was that, Miss Hero? Are you being horny in my chat?
This
This is a horny
is
free place.
still being recorded.
It'll be cut out. Don't worry about it.
I don't know about that.
Okay. So, uh, now let's get back on track, I guess. So, as I said, any thoughts about any general impressions on the chapter? I guess I'll start by saying that in a lot of ways, this was just like a continuation of how I felt about last chapter. It's another fast-paced look into what was primarily a single perspective. There were, there was Emmer Haynes' perspective at the very start, and a little bit about the first queen of Calenfer, but it was mostly a chapter about Eldovin. And This one actually was very lore heavy. In last chapter, we had a lot of character growth, I think, for Tyrion, but in this chapter, we had a lot of lore progression, basically, for Eldiven. And that lore progression was very interesting in a lot of ways, but I think the chapter overall was just very good, and I'm really excited to see where we're going next chapter. Those were my impressions, so let's move on to what everyone else thought. Edmund Alcorn said, I wanted to say something about unicorns. We actually have a unicorn-based question, so we can get to that in a little bit. Ren said, Tyrion wants to show Ryoka his unicorn. Yeah, I'm sure he does. I'm sure he's very proud of his non-existent unicorn that he doesn't have because that's Magnolia's. So I don't know what exactly you meant there, but okay, I do know what you meant, but jeez. Munch says, I originally didn't think Terry would die with this Eldiven situation, but after this chapter and hearing how he's tiring out his original body's mana, given he's using so much that even wrists would feel the burn, I'm beginning to worry what state his body will be in after, whether he might actually die. Honestly, I'm feeling like very similar to you. Like, I have this doomsday kind of prediction in my mind right now where at some point he's going to be in the middle of a battle and he's like constantly been drawing on his dragon mana for so long that he just like runs out. All of a sudden he's just out. And because of that, he dies like horribly. And that's one of the conditions that his real body could die, is if he has a very messy death. So if he runs out of mana in the middle of a battle and he just like goes splat all of a sudden, I think that's one of the few situations in which Terry dies. And I think it's like being foreshadowed at this point, which is scary in a lot of ways to me. Medmir says, fun chapter, lore is good. Also, lots of new and cool spells. Yes. I love learning about spells. And just like, this has been said a lot before, but Pirateaba's ability to do wizard battles, mage battles is just really, really good. It's amazing how much they come up with, and it's just awesome. Ren says, I've got to earn my class after all. Maybe you don't need to earn that. Germaro says, I wonder how many lance and thrusting skills Tyrion has, especially those that can be used both on the battlefield and in bed. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of that. Munch says, nope, not going to read that. Mr. Europe, you wanted to talk.
Yeah, regarding Teriarch's death or possible of it. I originally had the same like dread towards it when I read the chapter, but someone pointed out in the patron chat that I don't think it's as likely anymore because of I think what's going to happen is that Rafaema is going to go to the high passes and wake up Teriarch like right before disaster strikes, solely because I don't think it fits for Rafaema's arc that she arrives in the high passes just to find the Teriarch's like fresh corpse. I don't think that makes sense for her story, so to speak. Like usually when you are about to hit someone with that much tragedy, you don't do it right after you give them a nervous breakdown or something. Like they're supposed to, like, there has to be some happiness in her life at some point before you hit her with major tragedies.
Are you sure? I think we could just keep piling them on and 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 on.
I mean, you could, but it just seems cruel.
Maybe a little bit, but I do see your point there. It's just at the same time, I don't even know how Rafaima could get into Teriarch's cage or cave because he did set up that spell that supposedly like completely and utterly cuts him off from the world. So I don't even know how he would get in there right now, or how she'd get in here there right now because of how hard it is. It'll be interesting to see. Um, okay, general impressions are done. So let's move on to some of these questions. I'm just gonna combine these two questions into one since they're kind of there's not a lot to them. But what do you guys think Emmerhane is working on right now? It seemed to be something that would take out the dragon piece, which should be referring to Eldiven, and uh, so that's one question. And the second question is, who is the female dragon to Teriarch? Um, I'll just give my answers to these two questions while I wait for you guys. But I think I really don't have a clue what Emmerhane could be doing right now. He seems to be doing some kind of spell formula through uh Aaron, and he's like trying to write it through himself, but I don't really know what he could be doing during that. Like maybe he's working on something to trace uh where Teriarch is in his cave um through his uh through his connection to his simulacrum, but I don't really know what he could be doing that relates to Eldiven right now. Um, the female dragon is almost certainly, in my mind, his mother, simply because that's the only dragon we've heard of that has a relation to Teriarch in any way. So it just kind of makes sense to me that it's his mother. Um, Munch says Red Dragon's probably his mom. Yeah. Mr. Europe says female dragon is Terry's mom. She's the only female dragon he has mentioned. Exactly. Um, Part-time Hermit says, honestly, I'm expecting a repeat of the Solstice chapter plotline where Ryoka nearly succeeds, but that fails because of Aaron. That would be interesting, but I guess I don't really know how that would happen. Like, I'm just trying to think of ways it could, but I'm drawing a blank, so we'll see exactly what does happen. Metasmere says it could just be a way to break the link back to his body. And yeah, that definitely could be it. But I think maybe instead of like breaking the link, it could be like capturing him in some simulacrum as he was like going back to his body. So it's like a cage being built so he can't return back to being a dragon. Because that would like take him out of the game basically. He wouldn't be able to do anything. Um, all right, I don't see any more other responses to these questions, so let's move on. So this was the unicorn question that I had prepared, but when I was reading about this unicorn being a horny bastard, I was just thinking like it's a unicorn having sex with a bunch of horses. Horses that can't talk, they are basically animals. And so I'm just thinking, how do you react to a unicorn who is probably intelligent having sex with a bunch of horses that are animals, basically? And it just like that kind of thought process in my mind is it kind of equates to me with a human having sex with a monkey, basically. It's just so odd to me that a unicorn would try and do that if they're intelligent. It's just, and it's kind of depressing in a lot of ways to me because of how lonely that unicorn must be that that's what they want to do. And it was a weird thought I had for that. But Menomir says it could just be a lot of animals in world are very intelligent, but it's still a bit weird. It's like I would say I would agree with you on that, but I don't really know if I don't know if he makes that distinction, but maybe he does. Who knows? Uh, Munch says, "What is a unicorn support to bang? I suppose to bang a centaur. You know, anything that's actually intelligent is basically what I'm getting at here. Anything that has more intelligence than a normal animal would." Um, Part-time hermit says, "Poor Randy. Thank you for your puns these days." And Mid All Corn says, "I wanted to say something about unicorns, not the sex thing." Go ahead. We'll encompass whatever you want to say about unicorns into this question as well.
Okay. I was reading the chapter and it talks about Teriarch saying there's one unicorn left on Israel. If that's true, then that would be the unicorn that Bomber ran into, which tried to kill him. But also, I'm not sure if that's correct because I thought Magnolia had a unicorn on her estates.
It might very well be the same unicorn, honestly.
I mean, it could be the same unicorn, but he was saying it was in the Vale Forest. I suppose maybe Magnolia could have convinced it to come over to her place, but I remember it was mentioned that that vampire dude almost got killed by a unicorn
I don't
because they're
remember that
assholes.
very well, but it could be the same unicorn. Like, this is the only unicorn we've heard of outside of unicorn horns. Is that all you wanted to say about unicorns, though?
Right. I was just bringing up that there was one mentioned before, so I don't know if it's the same one, and then about how the vampire got almost killed by one. Yeah.
Yeah. It probably is the same one, honestly. Okay, so Jamaro says, and before it turns out Unicorn is super depressed and tries to bang any biologically compatible animal on the off chance that a unicorn will be born. It sounds like something Pyroid would do. Honestly, like I could see that being the case here. Like kind of like Gila. I don't know how to say her name. Like she's a true griffin or something like that. She's a very different griffin from a normal griffin, and unicorns could be something like that. Like you have to just keep going at it until you get that magical unicorn coming out. Munch says the question here would be, if a dog suddenly gains sentience, is it no longer supposed to be attracted to normal dogs? And I don't know. That's a really hard question, and it's kind of why I'm stumped on this whole unicorn thing. Jarmaro says the unicorn is from the Vale Forest, the same forest. Not. Why do you have me read these stupid names? No, Strelis is from. Kel says not on her estates necessarily, just one she could call on, in relation to the unicorn. Vesker says, for what it is worth, the chapter mentioned the results of the unicorn's adventures appearing in high-quality stables. The mothers might have gotten intelligent from their owners' skills like Apista did. And yeah, that's definitely possible. Kel says, Royal Griffin, kind of like Old Blood Drakes, small % chance for them to happen in any birth. And yeah, that could be how this unicorn is trying to repopulate. All right, let's move on to the next question now. If no one else has anything else, well, if you have anything else to add, just keep typing it up. I'll move on to the next question though. This was a question about time magic and what effect does time magic have on the different ways time is expressed in TW time, TWI time, Deadlands time, and Earth time all being different experiences and they experience of past, present, and future simultaneously? And that's a hard question. I have no idea how it's affecting everything basically. Like we've already seen that um time in like the wandering in world basically is either faster or kind of disjointed from Earth time at the same time at the same time. So it's very odd to how time magic operates in that sense. And I don't really know the answer to that question because it's just like very trippy in how it's done so far. Medmir says time is all wibbly wobbly in TWI. And that's very true. Even accounting for narrative inconsistencies. Okay, so if no one else has anything else to add on that question, we'll move. It's Ren says is like inches and feet. Exactly. Time is hard to measure. In TWI at least. But let's move on to the next question now. How will Vizophican and other mortals respond to Eldiven taking Paxir hostage? And I think this what Eldiven did here will actually escalate the war a lot. Like Alien Domus's whole shtick at the very core of it is to try and protect immortals. And the fact that Eldiven has just kidnapped one and is possibly going to expose their secrets to everyone else around them. That kind of thing is really exceptionally dangerous for Alien Domus. So now that it could possibly get out there, even though like maybe they don't know that Eldiven really wouldn't let that kind of thing happen, the fact that it could happen, I think will make uh Visophican and the Lucifin and Agilum especially just incredibly wary. So though they're going to involve themselves in this conflict much more uh much in a much more hands-on way than what they were doing before. Kel says, not well, but I hope Ryoka has to have some character growth and be the mediator between all these factions. We've definitely seen that in both the last two chapters that Ryoka has done something. She's contacted both Tyrion and Eldiven. And so whether that's as a mediator or as, changing from Alien Domus's side, which is kind of what she's been on for a little bit, back to uh, Eldiven and Tyrion's side. Maybe that's what she's doing. We'll see, though. It'll be interesting. Menamir says, well, when they realize Eldiven is an immortal, they'll probably try to recruit him. The Lucifin will at least probably try to get a hostage exchange going. And yeah, if Ryoka is more upfront about who Eldiven is, that could help diffuse the situation a lot. But we all know Ryoka and being honest don't go very well together. Mr. Europe says this is probably when Ryoka gets involved. Visophican would probably approach her since they're friendly and he wants the kidnapped Lucifin back. When Ryoka hears about it, she's probably going to offer to get her back. And yeah, she definitely could offer that. And it could work out pretty well since without Ryoka being there and without her assistance in this, it looks very dicey for what could happen. Nobody says the kidnapping gives weight to Eldiven, but the fact that not a single one of the Lucifin died tells me that it's still open to a talk rather than a straight up fight. Kylara says they're afraid of being exposed because they assume he doesn't know what they are, so they also need to act fast if they want to prevent anything leaking. If they figure out he's immortal, they may try a different tactic. And yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, it's something that Ryoka definitely needs to say, that she needs to assure them in some way that Eldivan isn't just going to expose their secrets right then and there, because if they think that's going to happen, like, they're going to need to go on the offensive very quickly. Visionary says, to me, the Ryoka's name on the wind is just to anchor the timing of events. So now Eldivan's position and Tyrion's are both at the same timeline in regards to the end of chapters. And yeah, it's definitely there to anchor events like that, but I also think it's going to be helping them in some way. We'll see how though. Kylara says, I don't think Ryoka can be honest. It's not her secret to tell, and it could get Terriar killed if Ristveria takes advantage of his situation. And I don't think she can be fully honest, but I do think she can give assurances in some way that uh, that Eldivan himself won't take advantage or spread this kind of information, just for reasons, but he won't do that himself. All right, I think that's it for that question. So let's move on to the last question, which kind of was tied into this. Ryoka has been mentioned at the end of both this chapter and last chapter. What do you think her role in all this will be? As in, why is she contacting, how and why is she contacting both Tyrion and Eldivan right now? And I think, uh, as sorry, I think as who pointed out before? Oh yeah, as Mr. Europe pointed out, she's probably trying to act as a mediator between uh, the Lucifen and the other alien Damas immortals and the people that are coming to rescue her. And she knows that they're safe right now. Her and Samuel are safe in the middle of this kidnapping situation, but she can't really leave at this time. So she wants to try and act as some kind of mediator between them. And I think that's why she's contacted them like this. But if anyone else has any other thoughts, go ahead and give them. Elle says that Vizzo she knows Eldivan. She's the obvious mediator here. And yeah, she is the obvious one to mediate between this, but at the same time, she is like in contact with Kara right now, who has her own agenda and all this. So I wonder if maybe instead of mediating, she's doing something for Kara at the same time. All right. So while the last few people give their thoughts on that question, let's just move on to the very last question. Or actually, just let me read this off real fast. Kalara says Ryoka and Samuel can make all of Alien Domus's problems go away. However, Ristveria is the problem. Can't mediate if a possessive wyvern refuses to give anything up. Possessive worm, but yes, exactly. So let's just end the discussion of these chapters there, and just end this with one final question of how are you guys enjoying chapter a day so far? It feels pretty good. I'm liking it. I love chapter a day. It's always so fun. Get so much chapter, so much to do. Ren says it's killing me. Yeah, yeah, that happens. Kel says it's a nice present when I get up in the morning. Exactly. It's there every day. Every day. Edmund Alcorn says I heart chapter a day. We all do, apparently. Except when it's killing us. Kalara says Super Week was just discussed in the No Killing Goblins podcast. Great timing. Hey, maybe that was the inspiration for it. Menmir says, I like it, but it's not good for my sleep schedule. It needs to be released earlier or later. All I'll say is sleep when you sleep, okay? Just sleep. And then in the morning, you can wake up and be like, I have a present for me. And it feels nice. Spanner says, it's great, but I worry for Pirate. Jarmaro says, it's great for the plot. More concise chapters are great for progressing the story. Mr. Grip says, unfortunately, I want to see what happens with Geneva, but the chapter a day keeps her away. Actually, I think it's speeding it up towards when we can get to Geneva, because it should, the whole Tarandria arc should be done by the end of this week. So, after the chapter a day is done, we'll get to the Belarus arc, which might have Geneva? Could? Maybe? It's a possibility? And that'll be fun. But I think Spanner says, bold of you to assume it will be done this week. Hey, Pirateaba has said they had a plan, okay? They say they have a plan. Their timetables for their plans generally don't work out very well, but the plan is there, and that plan should have Tarandria done this week. We'll see if it happens, but it's there. Kylara says, will shape-shifting solve the Selphid's problems? I don't know. I don't think so. Like, I don't know if the wasting is a problem that can be solved by changing from being a Selphid into being a human, but it could, maybe, but I don't know. Jamaro says Pirate had planned to finish the volume in December. Now it's April. It's April, Jamaro? Really? Will it be May or even further? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it'll be middle of summer. Maybe it'll be next December. We could only be halfway through the volume. But no, for real, I think uh I think that we're gonna get done with the Trandry arc, we're gonna get done with the Belarus arc, and then we'll have the end of volume arc, which will be, some chapters just getting to the end of volume. Kel says Selphids into Badgers probably won't help. I don't know. Badgers are cuter than Selphids, I'll say that much. Spanner says, I think the wasting is necrosis from using dead bodies, so it might help. That's an interesting thought right there. Menamir says in response to the shape-shifting question that it's probably a prion disorder like chronic wasting disease that deer get, so maybe not. And yeah, that was kind of my thought on it. It might be some uh, disorder that just won't go away just by having a different body. Jamaro says in response to Spanner's comment that not too obvious. Itself as using dead bodies has always been common. They would have noticed throughout the millennia.
And that was Wiggles. So that wraps up today's discussion of the most recent chapters. Come back and join us in a couple days.